Cotton is up next on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by United States Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas. Good morning, Senator. How are you?
I'm good, Hugh. Good to be back on with you.
You joined the United States Senate in January of 2015 after serving in the House. Vice President Harris came in 2 years later. So you bookended her. You covered her entire career, both before and after, and you served with her on the Judiciary Committee. How would you advise President Trump and Senator Vance to run against Kamala Harris?
Kamala Harris is a dangerous San Francisco liberal who makes Joe Biden look moderate by contrast. Just look at her record, Hugh, of what she's done as Attorney General, as a senator, as Vice President, what she said she would do if she were elected president. She was the border czar, and we've had 10 million illegals cross our border, committing all kinds of crime and bringing fentanyl into the country. In 2019, she promised that she would decriminalize illegal immigration and give health insurance at taxpayer expense to illegals. At the same time, she promised to take away and ban your private health insurance. She cast the deciding votes as president of the Senate in her constitutional capacity for the trillions of dollars of spending that gave us record high inflation. She wants to take away firearms from millions of Americans by force, if necessary. She even wants to ban plastic straws, and that's on top of things like when she was Attorney General, writing the initiative that decriminalized shoplifting to a misdemeanor under $950 in California, setting off the crime sprees you've seen. So it's amazing to me that on the 40th anniversary of Gene Kirkpatrick's famous speech at the 1984 Republican National Convention about the San Francisco Democrats, that the Democrats are about to nominate an actual San Francisco Democrat.
Now, I know it is pretty amazing. The San Francisco Democrats, if you're old enough to remember, it was a joke in the 80s when Walter Mondale got tagged with support by San Francisco Democrats. It's no longer a joke. They want the country, and they want to do to the country what happened in California. Senator Cotton, Chris LaCivita, who's the campaign manager for President Trump, released on X the brand new Trump-Vance ad. I want to play it for you in the audience, get your reaction. Let's roll that tape.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
This is America's border czar, and she's failed us. Under Harris, over 10 million illegally here. 250,000 Americans dead from fentanyl. Brutal migrant crimes. And ISIS now here.
Do you have any plans to visit the border? You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. I mean, I don't understand the point that you're making.
Kamala Harris, failed, weak, dangerously liberal.
Failed, weak, dangerously liberal. I think that about does it, Senator. How many times would you play that ad?
Well, that is a very good ad, Hugh, because it talks about what she's responsible for as Joe Biden's point person on the border, who Joe Biden said just 2 months into his presidency, she's our lead. She speaks for me. But again, add on top of that the things that she promised to do when she was seeking the presidency in her own right. She said on top of all of the calamity of the last 3.5 years, that she would decriminalize illegal immigration, that she would abolish our immigration enforcement agency, and that she would give free health care to illegal immigrants. So if you think it's been bad at the border for the last 3.5 years, the worst is yet to come with Kamala Harris.
All right. Now, Senator Cotton, Dwayne asked me to ask you this. In your years of working in the Senate, as a colleague on Judiciary, and then as the President of the Senate, have you found common ground on to work on anything with Kamala Harris?
Well, Hugh, let me correct something first, and it's not a minor correction either for the purpose of our conversation. I only joined the Judiciary Committee after she left the Senate to become Vice President. I did, however, serve with Kamala Harris for 4 years on the Intelligence Committee. And I said that's not an insignificant difference for the purposes of our conversation. The Intelligence Committee, as you know, is one of the hardest working committees in the Senate. We meet for hours every week when we're in session, and it all happens behind closed doors. That means there's no cameras. There's no record of these meetings that will come out for at least, 50 or 75 years. So people are a little bit more of their true self under those circumstances. And while I can't disclose, obviously, the classified materials that we're discussing in those hearings, I will say if you think Kamala Harris's pronouncements on national security and foreign policy are naive and dangerous in public, you should have heard what she was saying in private.
Senator, how do you assess her worldview? Because, if you're on Intel with her, you know what her worldview is. How would you describe it to Americans?
Well, again, she's a San Francisco liberal. As Gene Kirkpatrick said in the famous San Francisco Democrat speech, she's a blame America first Democrat. She thinks America and America's allies are to blame for everything. Just look at the last week, Hugh. Now, I know we haven't seen much of Kamala Harris speaking out in public other than in closely guarded and protected rallies or meetings with her campaign staff. You probably won't see much of that for the next 98 days because her high command knows that that's when she puts a foot wrong at every step. Remember, this is a woman who didn't even make it to the starting gun in 2020. She had to drop her campaign in 2019 because she was so bad when she was speaking extemporaneously in press conferences or interviews or what have you. So you might not see much. But what's the one thing she has come out to speak about in the last week? It was after her meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu, in which she engaged in moral equivalence, condemning Israel, in effect, for starving kids in Gaza and killing children and committing mass civilian atrocities, as if all of that suffering in Gaza was not the responsibility of Hamas. And, of course, emboldening other Iranian-backed terrorists as well. They see Kamala Harris come out and condemn Netanyahu and demand Israel engage in unilateral ceasefires and negotiate against itself. And what do? They shoot rockets and missiles not 2 days later into Israel, blowing Israeli kids to pieces. And then what's the reaction from Kamala Harris? She immediately calls for restraint. She calls for Israel not to retaliate, not to escalate, expresses her concern about that, as opposed to her concern for the families of those dead Israeli kids. She still hasn't even in her own voice condemned those attacks. She's only, a day later, allowed her national security advisor, who, by the way, himself is an Iranian sympathizer who associates with Iranian spies, to put out a statement on her behalf. What is wrong with Kamala Harris? Why did she not come out and condemn the targeting and death of children in Israel?
I keep checking the Times of Israel to see if Israel has yet begun its response against Hezbollah. I expect it. What do you expect from Israel vis-a-vis Hezbollah in Lebanon?
It should be fire and fury, Hugh, when they're blowing children to pieces in Israel. But again, it may be the fact that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are putting intense pressure on Israel. They're already withholding numerous kinds and high quantities of weapons and munitions from Israel. It's possible that Kamala Harris is threatening that they'll just cut Israel off entirely if Israel actually goes to the jugular against Hezbollah or punish them so badly that they'll never again do something like they did on Saturday, blowing Israeli kids to pieces. But if it was up to the Israeli government and the people of Israel, I think you would see a furious response that would actually de-escalate the crisis, because it would teach Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran that there is much more of that to come if you ever see another attack like you saw on Saturday.
Now, Senator Cotton, I don't think it's possible for people to understand just how far left Kamala Harris is and what she will do to American foreign policy. But when I say she will be worse than Obama and Biden, I am sincere. I really do not know what she will do, but I don't believe she will do anything except worsen our recruitment crisis in the military. What do you think?
Again, Hugh, I saw Kamala Harris up close for 4 years behind closed doors without TV cameras rolling. She is a blame America first Democrat. She thinks America is the source of almost every problem in the world. And if we would just treat Iran like a normal nation and pull in our horns, then everything would be fine. And that Vladimir Putin was somehow going to be talked out of his continued ambition to take Ukraine, which is what Joe Biden's failure in 2022 was, that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was just perfect and had no subsequent follow-on effects, that any criticism of the Chinese Communist Party is somehow going to stoke an anti-Chinese yellow peril where you have nativism and xenophobia run amok. I cannot stress enough that she is a Blame America First Democrat. And remember, in 2019, the Democratic presidential primary was conducted largely on the basis of domestic and economic policy. That's why it's so critical that Kamala Harris come out of hiding and actually explain what she would do as commander-in-chief. We don't really have it in her own words. We only have it in bits and pieces, testimony from people like me who know it for a fact, a little bit from her record in the Senate. But she needs to come out and speak in her own voice, not Joe Biden's, not her Iran-sympathizing national security advisor, her own voice about what she would do for this country.
Senator Cotton, last question. I don't believe she'll select the obvious candidate for Vice President Josh Shapiro because not only is he Jewish, he's a very strong supporter of Israel. I just don't believe she can without fracturing her party. Do you think she'll do the politically smart thing and tap Shapiro, or will she go to Mark Kelly, another of your colleagues in the Senate?
Hugh, I wouldn't presume to give Kamala Harris advice about who she's going to pick as vice president. Here's what I know. Whoever she picks is going to parrot her positions as the most liberal senator during her time in the Senate and as a San Francisco Democrat, and they're going to be beholden to the same radical forces inside the Democratic Party. So to me, it doesn't really matter all that much who's chosen as the vice president. What matters is the top of the ticket, obviously. And Kamala Harris is a dangerous San Francisco liberal who shouldn't come within a country mile of the Oval Office. Again, if you think it's been bad under Joe Biden, if Kamala Harris replaces him, the worst is yet to come.
Last question, Senator. I'm going to ask Senator Cornyn this after the break. Should Joe Biden step aside? I'm not sure he's got the ability to do anything for the next 6 months. That appearance on the tarmac yesterday was not very reassuring.
Well, I think he needs to explain why he's capable of serving as president, yet not running for president. I think Kamala Harris needs to explain what she knew and when she knew it. Remember, the same people that are telling you right now that Kamala Harris is the second coming of Barack Obama and Martin Luther King Jr. wrapped into one, it's the same crowd that told you for years that Joe Biden was fit as a fiddle and sharp as a tack and ran circles around them behind closed doors. And who is the number one person saying that and vouching for Joe Biden? Kamala Harris. Again, she needs to answer to the American people what role she played in the cover-up of Joe Biden's decline.
Senator Tom Cotton, thank you for joining us. Follow him on X at SendTomCotton. I'll talk to you again next week. Don't go anywhere, America. John Cornyn is coming up.